The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up as the Panama card balloon. They were both in white and their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they had just been blown back in a torch or fly around the house. I must have stood for a few moments listening to the beat and stare up the curtains in the crown of picture on the wall. Then there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear windows and the cut wind died out of the bathroom and the curtains and the rugs and the two young women balanced slowly to the floor. The younger of the two was a stranger to me. She was extended full length at the end of the divan, completely motionless, and with her chin raised a little, as if she were balancing something on it, which was quite likely to fall. If she saw me up, if she saw me out of the corner of her eyes, she gave me a hint of it. Indeed, I was almost surprised into murmuring an apology for having disturbed her by coming in. The other girl, Daisy, made an attempt to rise. She leaned slightly forward with a conscientious expression. Then she laughed, and observed, charming little laugh, and I had to laugh too, and came forward into the room. I'm paralyzed with happiness. She laughed again, as if she said something very witty, and held my hand for a moment, looking out into my face, promising that there was no one in the world she so much wanted to see. That was the way she had. She hinted in a murmur at the surname of the balancing girl's baker. I've already said that this murmur was only to make people lean toward her, an irrelevant criticism that made it look less charming. At any rate, Miss Baker's lip fluttered. She nodded at me almost imperceptibly, and then quickly tipped her head back again. The object she was balancing had obviously turned a little and given her something of a fright. Again, a sorrow apology rose to my lips. Almost any exhibition of complete self-sufficiency draws a thunder tree before me. I looked back at my cousin, who began to ask me questions in a low, threatening voice. It was the kind of voice that the ear follows up and down as if each speech is an arrangement of notes that will never be played again. Her face was set and lovely, with bright things in it, bright eyes and a bright passionate mouth. But there was an excitement in her voice that Matt, who had cared for her, found difficult to forget. A thin compassion, a whispered listen, a promise that she had done gay. Exciting things just well, since that they were gay. Exciting things just exciting things hovering the next hour. I told her how I had stopped off in Chicago for a day on my way east, and how a dozen people had sent their love to me. They miss me, she cried ecstatically. The old town is desolate. All the cars have the left wheel painted black as a morning read, and there's the persistent well all night along the North Shore. How gorgeous. Let's go back, Tom, tomorrow. Then she added irrelevantly, you gotta see the baby. I'd like to. She's asleep. She's 2 years old. Haven't you ever seen her? Never. Well, you ought to see her. She's Tom Buchanan, who had been hovering restlessly about the room, stopped and rested his hand on my shoulder. What you doing, Nick? I'm a boss man. Who wait? I told him. Never heard of them. He remarked decisively. It's annoyed me. You will. I answered shortly. You will if you stand this. Oh, I'll stand this, don't you worry, he said, glancing at Daisy and then back at me, as if he were alert for something more. I'll be a goddamned fool to live anywhere else. At this point, Miss Baker said absolutely, with such suddenness that I started. It was the first word she uttered since I came into the room. Evidently, it surprised her as much as it did me, for she yawned and with a series of rapid, deft movements stood up into the room. I'm stiff, she complained. I've been lying on the sofa for as long as I can remember. Don't look at me, Daisy retorted. I've been trying to get you to New York all afternoon. No thanks, said Miss Baker to the four cocktails just in front of the pantry. I'm absolutely in training. Her host looked at her incredulously. You are. He took down his drink as if it were a drop in the bottom of a glass. How you ever get anything done, spit me. I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what it was she got done. I enjoyed looking at her. She was a slender, small-breasted girl with an exact carriage. which she accentuated by throwing her body backward at the shoulders like a young cat. Her gray, sun-strained eyes looked back at me with polite, reciprocal curiosity out of one charming, discontented face. It occurred to me now that I had seen her, or a picture of her, somewhere before. You live in Westside, she remarked contemptuously. I know somebody there. I know some. I don't know a single. But you must know Gatsby. Gatsby? Demanded Daisy. What Gatsby? Before I could reply that he was my neighbor, dinner was announced. Watching his hands arm imperturbably under mine, Tom Buchanan compelled me from the room, as though he were moving a checker to another square. Slenderly, languidly, their hands set lightly on their hips. The two young women preceded us out onto a rosy-colored porch open toward the sunset, where four candles flickered on the table in the diminished wind. "Why candles?" objected Daisy, frowning. She stepped them out with her fingers. "In 2 weeks it'll be the longest day in the year." She looked at us irradiably. "Do you always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it?" "I always watch for the longest day in the year and then miss it." "We ought to plan something," yawned Miss Baker, sitting down at the table as if she were getting into bed. "All right," said Daisy. "What we plan?" She turned to me helplessly. "What do people plan?" Before I could answer, her eyes fastened in an odd expression on her little finger. "Look," she complained. I hurried. We all looked. The knuckle was black and blue. "You did it, Tom," she said accusingly. "I know you didn't mean to, but you did do it. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man. A great big hulking physical specimen of a—" "I hate the word hulking," objected Tom crossly. "Even in kidding." "Hulking," insisted Daisy. Sometimes she and Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively, and with a bantering in consequence that was never quite chatter. That was as cool as their wet dresses, and their impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. They were here, and they accepted Tom and me, making only a polite, pleasant effort to entertain or to be entertained. They knew that presently dinner would be over, and a little later the evening too would be over, and casually put away. It was sharply different from the West, where an evening was hurried face to face toward its close, in a continually disappointing anticipation, or else in sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. "You make me feel uncivilized, Daisy," I confessed on my second glass of corky but rather impressive claret. "Can't you talk about crops or something?" I meant nothing in particular by this remark, but it was taken up in an unexpected way.